Hello, this is my mini presentation for the experimental improvisation model by Barucha and Riordan. A little bit of background information. This model was developed in 1972 by Anne Riordan. It is a method of improvisation that resembles a lab situation where certain variables are held constant while others are either systematically manipulated or allowed to vary freely. Group members are actively engaging in problem solving, and some of these basic aspects of problem solving include identifying alternatives within confines of a given musical situation and determining which alternatives are most fulfilling for the group. Some key issues that are explored are creativity, interpersonal freedom, and responsibility. This model also interweaves between two modalities, where experiences in one can be used to reinforce and validate experiences in the other, but also using both modalities can provide important shifts in the group dynamics. And the last bullet point here, it involves dance improvisation, musical improvisation, and verbal discussion. There are two types of dance improvisation and musical improvisation. Dance improvisation is stimulated by movement elements alone and then accompanied by a recording. It's also stimulated by live or recorded music improvisations, where musical improvisations are stimulated by musical elements alone and unaccompanied by improvised dance, and can also be stimulated by dance improvisations. So there are 12 procedural phases, and these phases are a cyclic pattern that repeats until this improvisation is completed and the group is ready for a final performance. So the first one here is a warm-up phase, which is a preparation period consisting of a group discussion, comments from the therapist, dance or music experiences, or previous performance reviews. The focus phase is the first step in leading experimental improv groups, and a given is used as the basis for this improvisation. There are three main types of givens, which are those affecting vocabulary, those affecting procedures, and those affecting interpersonal relationships. The experiment phase includes the group understanding what the freedoms and limitations are within those givens, and they can begin to explore the possibilities that are available to them. I will also be referencing back to this phase when I get to my table later in this presentation. The first react phase is where the group gathers together to discuss what happened and how they felt, and equal attention is given to the process of improvising and the resulting product. Finding the theme is where a theme is formulated out of what they did previously through spontaneous improvisation rather than a further discussion. When they mention a theme, the definition of a theme is a unified idea or series of movements or musical events that have some consistency and meaningful connections with each other. The second react phase is when the group discusses individual and collective reactions to what happened while experimenting. This is also when the theme is refined conceptually and projects what movement or musical adjustments are needed or necessary. The rehearse phase is when they are repeatedly performing one or more sections of the improvisation, and this phase focuses on implementation where previous phases focused on decision making. The refocus phase directs the group's attention to a particular area and invites exploration. There are concerns, though, with where and how the improvisation should go versus where or how it should begin. The connect phase happens when two themes are developed and rehearsed through both verbal discussion and experimental improvisation. There is a common denominator that is found between the two themes, so that's where the connection can actually occur. The third and last react phase happens when the group evaluates and discusses what happened in the connection phase. Perform phase is when the group is ready to execute the improvisation once all the themes have been connected and rehearsed. This phase is actually frequently viewed as the climax of the entire experience because that's where a lot of the emotions are going to run high for all of the group members. And then the last phase is the review phase, and it takes place after the performance, reflects on the performance and process the group underwent in preparing for it, and summarizes what has been discovered and learned. So there are 6 stages of therapy in experimental improvisation. The first one is acclimation, where individuals become familiarized to the group on an interpersonal level and comes to terms of the improvisation process. There are a limited range of expressions. There are self-protection and concerns, and have respectable and predictable behaviors. The second stage is the self-exploration stage, which is the stage I will come back to and mention again when I talk with the chart. This stage begins as soon as the group becomes less concerned with safety. There's more of an expansive, expressive range, and there's an integration of becoming less grounded. The third one is the role exploration, coordinates one efforts with others, where individuals can vie for a specific role and identify their counterparts. The fourth stage is called conflict resolution, where the group works to organize and coordinate efforts of its members. There are conflicts of laziness and fighting behaviors, and a leadership crisis can occur where the therapist has to make a crucial decision. Now, the 5th and 6th stages will all be depending on if the group retains or changes the therapist as a leader. If the leadership is retained, role integration and independence will occur. If leadership changes, disenchantment, fight, and consensual validation will occur. And I will talk about all 4 of those stages next here. So, role integration happens when the group works under the overall direction of the therapist but follows different members of the group in the implementation of the work phases of improvisation. Independence happens when the therapist withdraws and becomes a so-called technical advisor, while the group practices improvising by themselves. Now, here is the other change. If the group, if leadership changes, disenchantment fight happens when 2 subgroups form over the degree of personal involvement in the group, and self-disclosure and vulnerability can become major concerns. And then consensual validation occurs when upcoming end of the group induces the members to analyze what they have learned about interpersonal and group behaviors. And then a few more points that experimental improvisations are analyzed along 3 main axes for assessment. The first one is called selfness and otherness, which reflects the extent to which an individual relates to their music or dance materials to others. And in each axis, I will be including what levels are included in the certain axis. So in this one axis, levels include towards others or against self, towards others or away from self, towards other and towards self, towards self and away from others. Then the last one is towards self and against others. The second axis is called fusion differentiation, which is a continuum for examining the extent to which simultaneous aspects of the music or dance fit together. Levels along this axis include fusion, which simultaneous events correspond with each other most of the time. Integration, elements correspond with each other half of the time. And differentiation rarely corresponds with each other. The third and final axis is called stability change. It reflects the extent to which elements of the music and dance change or remain the same as time progresses within successive relationships. And the levels along this axis include the stability, where elements are repeated or maintained with little variations. Development, elements are repeated and changed with equal frequency. And then elements change frequently and are rarely repeated. So this is my chart, and wanted to kind of not be so specific, but focus in on a certain clientele, and one that would work with this experimental improvisation model would be a child with a learning disability. So the client which shows difficulties in novel social situations and refuses to talk to peers. My goal for this would be the client will be able to engage in new experiences, with the objective being the client will engage in improvisation experiences for 2 consecutive minutes, 4 times per session for 4 consecutive sessions. Repetition and full participation is encouraged and will really help the child in the end. What sorts of methods, procedures, and techniques will music therapy help in this stance? In experimental improvisation, the music therapist will model a few improvisation options and then ask the client to try and improvise one of them using the suggested variations on an instrument of their choice. Throughout the experiment phase, which is what I talked about in one of the procedural phases, the music therapist and peer modeling may be utilized to help the client expand their expressive ranges in the self-exploration stage. So as I mentioned before, the experiment phase and self-exploration stage are the two specifics that would be utilized instead of the long process that I just explained to you. It was easier to think about one stage and one phase for this method and procedure section. And then how is music used in this process? It's actually used as a process, as we learned way back when, earlier in the semester, by engaging the client in a music experience that allows for that self-exploration. So it's very expressive, and I have really enjoyed learning about this model. It's a lot of information, I know, but I hope that you enjoyed listening to it. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to let me know. Thank you so much for listening. And here are my references, just in case if you wanted to see what I used. Just the book. Thank you very much.